This podcast is sponsored by Murgitroyd, intellectual property attorneys. For more information on today's guest and our company, visit murgitroyd.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the 7th season of Murgitroyd's Innovation Talks podcasts. We're delighted that more and more of you are choosing to join us. If you have any questions, you can email us at innovation.talks@murgitroyd.com or contact us via Twitter @Murgitroyd. And please remember to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. So let's go straight into today's podcast.
Hello, I'm Russell Thom, UK Regional Head of Patents at Murgitroyd. Today, I would like to welcome Professor Martin Tangney OBE of Celtic Renewables onto the podcast. Martin, hello and welcome.
Hi Russell, thanks for having me.
Celtic Renewables is an innovative clean tech company based in the UK that has developed a low carbon process technology to provide alternatives to fossil fuels. And so perhaps as a start, Martin, you could provide a bit of background on yourself and what led to setting up of Celtic Renewables.
So I'm a microbiologist by training, and unlike a lot of academic microbiologists, I actually went into industry for a while, and that's where I kind of picked up my industrial nuance and the importance of patenting, which of course is critical to what we do with you guys and what led to the establishment of the business. When I left industry, I came back into academia here in Edinburgh, and I wanted to apply what I'd learned in industry on a defunct technology. The fermentation I was interested in, it was actually developed here in the UK 100 years ago. It takes sugar materials and converts them into chemicals, acetone, butanol, and ethanol, which gives the fermentation its name, the ABE fermentation. It's fascinating history. It was originally developed to make acetone for war in the First World War. Acetone was needed to make explosives. And that's what led to the commercialization of this process, not the butanol, which is the dominant product. So by the end of the Second World War, it was the second biggest industrial fermentation process the world has ever known. The drinks industry is the only thing that's ever been bigger than it. But it died out in the 60s, mainly because it used very expensive raw materials, food crops, effectively. And that was anywhere between 70 and 90% of the cost of production. So it just could not compete with the now booming petrochemical industry, which had taken over the world after the Saudi Arabian oil fields were commercialized after the Second World War. So this thing was brought down largely by economics, not by its biology. And it might have remained a defunct process, except in 2005, a proper inventor, proper pioneer by the name of David Ramey took butanol, filled his car up with a totally unmodified engine and drove 10,000 miles across the state, stopping off at the Golden Gate Bridge and Capitol Hill and everywhere to take photographs to show his new car. And that got the ball rolling for people to look at this as a new advanced sustainable biofuel. You know you could make it biologically because the world did it at an enormous scale all over the planet. So he's the real inventor and pioneer behind this. And that got the industry interested, and then that piqued my interest because working in that fermentation as an academic and having come from industry, I felt, right, here's a real opportunity. And that's what started the whole thing. So I set up the first Centre for Sustainable Biofuel in the UK, and part of that remit was to engage industry and government with academia and bring innovation into the market in a new space that would be sustainable. And that's where it all kicked off.
Thanks very much. So obviously, pre-company launch, then you had seen the value of your research and the way in which you might be able to think about this and gain exclusivity of the process for a company. And this was way before you entered into agreements with suppliers or to scale up the process. So in that company formation, moving from your academic background and setting up of Celtic Renewables, how important was your initial IP in allowing you to raise initial funding and gain interest in the company?
Yeah, so for me, given that the fermentation had been defunct, there were very few people in the world who really looked at it. Some research can be very newspaper-driven, topical. Plastics is huge, thanks to what Mr. Attenborough did, Sir Attenborough did for us. And, you know, you get cycles of these things. So that stimulated a whole interest in butanol, which allowed me to capitalise it. And coming from an industrial background, I felt, right, there's a real opportunity here. So I looked to see what brought the industry down in the first place, and it was the cost of the raw material. So my simple invention was address that part of it, address that part of the problem. Could you get a cheaper raw material? And then you don't need to make superbugs or make the processing more efficient than it biologically can be. You just address the problem at a different part of the equation. So we set about to see if I could find cheaper raw material than food crops. And living in Scotland, the most abundant source of biological residues comes from the whisky industry. So Scottish Enterprise were running a program called the Proof of Concept program, which was designed for just this, to get people with ideas that could be commercialized and to develop them, not just the research, but the commercial case, the business case. Would it stack up after the research is completed? And so with that funding, I set about immediately with a business head on me to try and take this to industry, to the market. So that was always going to be the outcome for me, is that, after 2 years of research on this, looking at the residues from the whisky industry, which are copious, this wasn't just some small twee thing. There's 2 billion litres a year of liquid effluent produced called pot ale, and 750,000 tonnes of a solid residue that has lower limited value. And we could upscale these things, upskill them into something far more valuable using a process. If we could get it to work with these low carbon residues rather than the high carbon expensive stuff, then we'd change the whole dynamics of a process that fundamentally we knew could work at scale. So that's what I wanted to do. And then there's a big distinction between having proven that it works and can take it to the market. And the only currency really that you have at the end of a research project is, well, yourself and your team, but your IP. It's all you have to barter with. The idea could be brilliant, but if you want to set up your own company, you need some sort of a currency. You're trading with people. They're going to give you money in return for shares in your business. And what's your business worth? It's worth the strength of your team and your IP. So it was always critical. And I knew this from working with a really big company, Novozymes in Copenhagen.
So very much looking at the customer, what the customer is looking for, which was the fuel, seeing the technical problems and being able to provide that. Looking at the overall business model as to how you could provide that end product at a cost that was applicable to the customer, and then looking to frame your intellectual property around that, as you say, so that you could take that as currency to grow the company going forward from there. Perfect. An excellent example of how IP should be used in that way. And obviously that was some time ago, and the company's grown and scaled. Certainly initially, it was really about growing the company, scaling. I'm aware that Celtic Renewables was named Europe's most innovative biotech SME in 2015. So you must have been doing something right at that point. Over those years, as you've developed your process and obviously grown that, is there anything that you think now you wish you could go back and tell your former self, or has it all worked according to plan?
Well, I'll tell you, there's some days that my advice would be, don't do it. Stay in bed, don't get up. And I suppose, joking aside, that is kind of the big advice I would go back. It's not advice, it's a warning, really. This is going to be an awful lot harder than you think it is. There's probably a myriad of wonderful scientific ideas that are floating around out there that'll never make it into commercial process because it's a pretty rough road. It's a hard thing to do, to take things. And the more innovative they are, the more difficult they are to fund, because people like to see something that works, but to get it to the scale to prove that it does work costs money. And that's the dilemma. So I might have given myself a bit of a heads up that it's going to be a lot harder than you think. And I suppose the other thing I would say is that I wouldn't have been alone doing this. Other people have done the same thing. They've had the same sort of experiences. And maybe seek a little bit more advice, because these problems aren't unique. And for all innovators out there, you're going to feel as if this is unique to you. It's not really. Everybody's fundamentally, if they're making a car or a phone or whatever, they're fundamentally trying to do something other people haven't done before. And the generic experiences are the same. And it's worth taking advice where you can get it. And
so obviously interest in the environment has just been growing and growing in recent years. And there's significant discussion at the moment of a transition to a sort of low carbon economy, particularly in relation to post-COVID green recovery. Over that period, what would you say the key aspects really have been that's allowed you to grow and that you see as looking favourable going forward for you, over the next 4 or 5 years?
I think you're right. I think there has been a recognisable shift. People have talked about sustainability and the environment for a very, very long time. But if COVID has done anything for us, it's locked people up at home and given them quite a lot of time to stew on things. And I think coming out of this now, people do realise, well, maybe we don't need to go to the office every day of the week. Maybe we don't need to travel around the world. Maybe I should wear that same shirt 2 or 3 times. Everybody has looked at the minutiae of their lives in details that they probably never needed to, but circumstances have dictated that is the case. And I think we're in a position where we can exploit that interest and go, right, come on, let's do this. Because I firmly believe that environmentalism isn't about going out and hugging a tree. It's if that's all your business is you've got a nice thought and genuine ethos behind what you're doing, it's not enough. It has to be economically sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable. And I think people can see that now. They can sense it. Let's grow a sustainable economy. It's not a wish list. This is something we need to do. And we've tapped into that. But it's been at the heart and soul of what we've been trying to do all along. This was always going to have to be commercially viable. But I think there's a greater appreciation and awareness of that across society. People go, yeah, it's not a bad thing to make money out of good things.
And in terms of that, where are you now in terms of developing production facilities at Celtic Renewables?
Yeah, you said we've been around a little while. So yeah, I filed the patents quite a long time ago now and set up the company. This is our 10th year. But we took it from basically a test tube to what we're currently doing is we're building the first biorefinery in Scotland. It's the first biorefinery of its kind anywhere in the world. It's kind of big. It's still a commercial demonstrator, but it's big enough to be commercial and still not giant enough that it's a full-scale production facility, but it's pretty big. It's got everything we need and more, because if you're going to get anything wrong, you get it wrong there, and make sure that we don't underspec the whole thing. So it really is a shiny, state-of-the-art, brand new, rather exciting for me, facility that's coming up, and it will be a first of its kind. But like I said, the post-COVID world and growing a bioeconomy, I hope this serves a role not just as a Celtic Renewables facility, but as an exemplar to show that you can take innovation, you can create new industries, you can do things where you take a material that has a limited value and you convert it into something that's much higher value that you need. And along the way, you create jobs and cut carbon emissions and reuse stuff and whatever it may be. And there's a bigger picture, I think, that everybody's thankfully buying into now, that can see the value in doing this across society. And for us, when this opens, it really will be a sign of our past, but of Scotland's future.
Thanks very much, Martin, for all your insight today.
Great to talk to you, and thanks to you guys for helping us through this journey. You played a fantastic role in guiding a young startup to nurture its IP in the right way. And it's felt more like working with a team than working with advisors to me. So, yeah.
Always a pleasure. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time today. We hope you found today's podcast valuable. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. So until the next time, goodbye.
Our business is founded on trust and collaboration. The subjects we choose for our podcasts are topical and informative. We are always looking for suggestions for new topics for discussion, so if there's an area of IP that you're keen to understand better, please drop us a line at innovation.talks@murgitroyd.com.